The rain drummed against the cracked windows of the small apartment as 22-year-old Sophia Chen stared at the eviction notice, in her trembling hands. In the next room, she could hear Henry, the man she believed was her father, groaning in what she thought was agony from his deteriorating eyesight. "Sophia!" Margaret's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. "Where's the money for your father's medication? It's $1,000 and he's in so much pain." Sophia's heart clenched. She had worked herself to exhaustion, taking double shifts at the diner while maintaining her pre-med grades, but it was never enough. The medical bills kept mounting, and Henry's condition seemed to worsen by the day. "I'll get it, Mom," she whispered, though she had no idea how. "I promise." That's how she found herself standing outside a dingy building with a flickering neon sign, her hands shaking as she approached the counter. "I heard you paid double for blood donations," she said, her voice barely audible. The man behind the counter looked her up and down with predatory eyes. "You're desperate for cash, sweetheart." "My father is going blind," Sophia explained, fighting back tears. "The insurance won't cover his medication. He's all I have." What Sophia didn't know was that Henry was perfectly healthy, watching television in the next room with crystal clear vision, while Margaret counted the money from Sophia's last paycheck, money that was supposed to go toward medical bills, but had instead funded Derek's new gaming setup. The supposed doctor led Sophia to a back room, but his intentions were far from medical. He suddenly injected her with a strange substance while pretending to draw her blood, and within moments she realized the horrifying truth and fled, her body burning from whatever drug they'd forced upon her. She is a third-year medical student, so her understanding gave her quick wits to flee immediately before losing consciousness, or whatever the drug was meant for. Dr. Alexander Sterling was leaving another tedious charity gala when he saw her, a young woman stumbling down the dark street, clearly in distress. Something about her delicate features struck a chord deep in his memory, transporting him back to the most terrifying day of his childhood. 15 years earlier, when Alexander was 13, he had been kidnapped by men seeking ransom from his wealthy family. They had beaten him and left him tied up in an abandoned warehouse, assuming he would die before anyone found him. Dehydrated and barely conscious, he had given up hope when he heard a small voice. "Hello, are you okay?" A girl, no more than 7 years old, with dark hair and the kindest eyes he had ever seen, knelt beside him. She was clearly from the poor part of town. Her clothes were worn and patched, but clean. "I'm so thirsty," he had whispered. Without hesitation, the little girl had given him her bottle of water. "Don't worry," she had said with mature determination that seemed impossible for someone so young. "I'll get help. I promise I'll come back." She had run through dangerous streets to find a police officer, leading them back to save his life. By the time the paramedics arrived, she had disappeared, and despite years of searching, Alexander had never found his angel again. Now, seeing this woman in distress, he couldn't shake the feeling that brought his savior's memories back. "Why did I suddenly remember this?" he spoke to himself. "Could she probably be the one?" "Ma'am, are you all right?" Alexander asked, stepping out of his car after his driver suddenly slammed the brake to avoid hitting her. "Please help me," Sophia gasped, collapsing against his vehicle. "They injected me with something. I can't think straight." Alexander's medical training immediately kicked in. He recognized the symptoms of a powerful drug, Rohypnol mixed with an aphrodisiac. Someone had tried to assault her. "Let me take you to the hospital," Alexander said gently, helping her into his car. "No hospitals," Sophia pleaded, her body burning with artificial desire. "I can't afford. I just need somewhere safe." Alexander drove her to his penthouse, despite his instincts warning him. He didn't know why he's so drawn to her, and his jaw clenched with rage at whoever had done this to her. As the drug coursed through her system, Sophia clung to his strength, and despite every professional instinct telling him to maintain distance, Alexander found himself drawn to her vulnerability and courage. "You're safe now," he whispered as he held her through the worst of the drug's effects. "I won't let anyone hurt you." What began as protection slowly transformed into something deeper. In her drugged honesty, Sophia spoke about her fears, her dreams of becoming a doctor to help people, and her desperate need for him to take her and be relieved of the heat coursing through her body. That night, their connection transcended the circumstances, and Alexander couldn't help yielding to his strange desire for the one in his arms. When morning came, both felt something profound had shifted between them. The harsh light of dawn brought reality crashing down. Sophia's phone buzzed with messages and began ringing incessantly, Margaret's name flashing on the screen. "I really need money," she said quietly, more to herself than to him, her heart sinking as she saw 17 missed calls from home. She could already hear Margaret's voice in her head, demanding to know where she was and why she hadn't brought home the $1,000 for Henry's medication. Alexander's expression changed instantly. After years of women pursuing him for his wealth, her words triggered every defensive instinct he had built. "So, that's what this was about," he said coldly, his voice like ice. "You're just another gold digger." Sophia looked stricken. "What? No, I should have known." Alexander pulled out his checkbook, writing with angry, sharp strokes. "Here. Is this enough for your performance last night?" The check was for $50,000, more money than Sophia had ever seen in her life. But the cruel dismissal in his eyes hurt more than any physical blow ever could. "You don't understand," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's not like that. Save it for the next wealthy man you manipulate," Alexander said, walking away. "I never want to see you again." Sophia stared at the check in her hands, her heart breaking into pieces. She could pay for Henry's surgery, Derek's college, and all the family's needs with this money. But something inside her rebelled against taking it. She carefully tore the check into pieces, letting them flutter to the ground like fallen dreams. After that night, Sophia had resumed her tedious life in a blur of double shifts and sleepless nights as if it never happened. Sophia worked at a diner during the day and had taken a second job at an upscale nightclub, where she served drinks to wealthy patrons who reminded her painfully of the man who had broken her heart. "Where's the money, Sophia?" Margaret demanded daily. "Your father is getting worse. He can barely see anything now." What Sophia couldn't see was Henry in the kitchen, reading a newspaper with perfect clarity, while Margaret practiced her concerned mother act in the mirror. After a month, Sophia started her internship at Sterling Medical Center, and she thought it was the opportunity that would change everything. Walking into the conference room on her first day, she froze when she saw the familiar figure at the front of the room. "Dr. Alexander Sterling," someone whispered beside her, the youngest department head in the hospital's history. His family owns half the medical centers in the state. When she arrived 15 minutes late, delayed by Margaret's insistence that she clean the kitchen before leaving, Alexander's cold gaze found hers across the room. "Late on the first day," he said, his voice cutting through the room. "Miss Chen, I presume?" "Dr. Sterling, please," Sophia said, stepping forward despite her racing heart. "I really need this internship. It won't happen again." For a moment, something flickered in Alexander's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the memory of the connection they had once shared. But it vanished quickly. "One exception," he said coldly. "There won't be a second." Back at his office, Alexander couldn't help but wonder why Sophia was back in his sight. The truth is, he had not been able to take her off his mind since that night, and the only thing stopping him from looking for her was her deceiving him about being drugged. How could a fraudster possibly sway his heart like this? However, it was impossible for her to have come looking for him here, as her file showed academic truth. It must have been a pure coincidence, he thought. But how was he supposed to face her every day here, hiding what he truly feels about her? Working under Alexander's supervision felt like exquisite torture, but as days turned into weeks, something began to shift in the careful walls he had built around his heart. It started with small observations. The way Sophia stayed late with a crying child in the pediatric ward, singing soft lullabies until the little boy fell asleep. How she remembered every patient's name, asking about their families and genuinely caring about their answers. The quiet way she ate lunch alone, always reading medical journals instead of gossiping with other interns. Alexander found himself watching her more than he should, his clinical detachment eroding bit by bit. "She's different," his colleague Dr. James observed one day, catching Alexander's gaze following Sophia down the corridor. "All interns are the same," Alexander replied curtly, but even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The first crack in his armor came during a particularly difficult surgery. An elderly man with no family had complications, and while Alexander worked to save his life, he noticed Sophia quietly crying in the corner, not from weakness, but from genuine empathy for a stranger who would die alone. After the successful surgery, Alexander found himself staying behind to ask, "Are you all right?" He reminds me of someone, Sophia said softly, wiping her eyes. I'm sorry for being unprofessional. Caring isn't unprofessional, Alexander found himself saying, surprising them both. The investigation begins. Alexander told himself he was just being thorough when he started looking into Sophia's background. As department head, he needed to ensure his interns were reliable. That's what he told James when his friend caught him researching her academic records. Her grades are exceptional, James noted, reading over Alexander's shoulder. Full scholarship, top of her class, but look at this. She's been working since she was 16. Multiple jobs, always in service industries. Just being thorough, Alexander muttered, but his eyes lingered on her employment history. Every job had stellar reviews praising her work ethic and kindness. The turning point came 3 weeks into her rotation. Alexander was reviewing patient files late one evening when he heard soft singing from the children's ward. Following the sound, he found Sophia sitting beside the bed of a little girl who had been abandoned by her parents after a cancer diagnosis. Will you stay until I fall asleep? The child whispered. Of course, sweetheart, Sophia replied, holding the girl's hand. I'll stay as long as you need. Alexander watched from the doorway as Sophia kept her promise, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair all night so the child wouldn't wake up alone. Something profound shifted in his chest, a recognition of the pure goodness he had dismissed so cruelly. Alexander began finding excuses to check on her. He told himself it was professional oversight when he brought her coffee during particularly long shifts. He rationalized it as mentorship when he started explaining complex procedures in more detail, watching her eyes light up with understanding and genuine fascination. You don't have to do that, Sophia said one afternoon when he handed her a sandwich, noticing she had skipped lunch again. You're no good to the patients if you collapse from hunger, Alexander replied, but his voice was gentler than it had been in weeks. Their fingers brushed as she took the sandwich, and both felt the electric connection that had never really disappeared. Alexander pulled back quickly, but not before Sophia saw something vulnerable flash in his eyes. One evening, while treating a patient together, Sophia accidentally cut her hand on a scalpel. Alexander's reaction was immediate and intense, his usual professional calm cracking. Let me see, he said, his voice tight with concern as he carefully examined the wound. It's just a small cut, Sophia protested, but Alexander was already cleaning it with meticulous care. You need to be more careful, he said quietly, his fingers gentle against her skin. This could have been much worse. The tenderness in his touch made Sophia's breath catch. For a moment, the walls between them disappeared entirely. Sophia, he began, then caught himself. Miss Chen, you should go home early today. Rest that hand. The almost use of her first name sent hope fluttering in her chest, but she quickly crushed it. He had made his feelings clear. Alexander's growing concern for Sophia reached a breaking point when he overheard her mentioning to another intern that she worked nights at a club. Every protective instinct he'd been trying to suppress roared to life. What kind of establishment was it? Was she safe? Why did she need to work such punishing hours? The questions tormented him until, against all professional judgment, he found himself following her after her hospital shift ended. He told himself he was just ensuring the safety of his intern, but deep down, he knew he was falling for her all over again. The upscale nightclub surprised him. It wasn't the seedy establishment he had feared, but an elegant venue that catered to the wealthy elite. He watched from a corner table as Sophia moved between patrons, her professional smile never quite reaching her eyes. She looked exhausted. Even from across the room, Alexander could see the weight of her double life, the careful way she moved, conserving energy, the dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. When he saw 2 intoxicated men cornering her, forcing her to sit with them despite her obvious discomfort, Alexander's carefully maintained distance crumbled entirely. Come on, sweetheart, one of the men slurred, pressing a drink toward her lips. One little sip won't hurt. I can't, Sophia said firmly, trying to stand. I'm working, and I don't drink. She said no. Alexander's voice cut through the noise as he appeared at their table, his presence commanding immediate attention. The confrontation escalated quickly when one of the men grabbed Sophia roughly, and Alexander's control snapped completely. The fight that followed was swift and decisive, Alexander's protective fury giving him strength he didn't know he possessed. Afterward, as they sat in his car, both shaken by the violence and the emotions it had unleashed, the silence stretched between them. Why did you help me? Sophia finally whispered. I couldn't just watch them hurt you, Alexander admitted, his hands still trembling with residual anger. Then more quietly, I know what it's like to feel helpless. You followed me here, Sophia said, not accusingly, but with wonder. Alexander looked away, embarrassed by his behavior. I overheard you mention working at a club. I was concerned about what kind of place it might be. Concerned about me? The vulnerability in her voice made him meet her eyes again. Yes, he said simply. I was concerned about you. For the first time since that terrible morning, Sophia saw something other than coldness in his gaze. Hope bloomed tentatively in her chest. 3 weeks after the nightclub incident, Sophia's world tilted on its axis in the most unexpected way. She had been feeling unwell for days, nauseous in the mornings, exhausted beyond what even her punishing schedule could explain, and her emotions seemed to swing wildly between hope and despair. It was Dr. Martinez, the senior resident, who first noticed. Sophia, you look pale, she said during their morning rounds. Are you feeling all right? Just tired, Sophia replied, but even as she said it, a wave of nausea hit her so hard she had to excuse herself to the bathroom. Standing in the sterile hospital restroom, gripping the sink for support as her stomach roiled, a terrifying possibility began to take shape in her mind. She counted the days since her last period, her heart sinking with each passing number. No, it couldn't be. They had been careful that night, hadn't they? But even as she tried to deny it, her body was telling her a different story. The tenderness in her breasts, the overwhelming fatigue, the way certain smells made her stomach turn, all signs she had learned about in medical school but never imagined experiencing herself. That evening, after her hospital shift ended, Sophia found herself standing in the pharmacy, staring at the pregnancy tests with trembling hands. The kind elderly pharmacist gave her a concerned look. Are you all right, dear? Yes, Sophia whispered, though she felt anything but all right. I'm fine. She bought 3 different tests, her hands shaking as she counted out the money. Money that should have gone toward Henry's supposed medication. But she needed to know, she had to know. Back at home, she waited until Margaret and Derek were asleep, until Henry had stopped his theatrical groaning about his blindness, and crept quietly into the bathroom. The first test took the longest 3 minutes of her life. Sophia sat on the edge of the bathtub, her hands pressed to her stomach, whispering prayers to a God she wasn't sure was listening. Please, let it be negative. I can't handle this. Not now, not like this. But when she looked at the plastic stick, 2 clear pink lines stared back at her. Positive. Sophia's breath came in short gasps as she stared at the result. With shaking hands, she took the second test, then the third, hoping against hope that the first had been wrong. All positive. Sophia collapsed onto the bathroom floor, her back against the door, as the reality crashed over her in waves. She was pregnant with Alexander Sterling's baby, the man who thought she was a gold digger. The man who had written her a check and told her he never wanted to see her again. The man she worked for every day, who was slowly, carefully, beginning to trust her again. What would he think when he found out? Would he believe the baby was his? Or would he assume she was trying to trap him? Would he think this was all part of some elaborate scheme? Tears streamed down her face as she thought about her impossible situation. She had no money for prenatal care. Margaret and Derek already resented every penny she couldn't contribute to the household. How could she tell them she was pregnant and Henry's surgery? How could she continue working the double shifts necessary to save for his medical bills if morning sickness made her too sick to function? The baby. Sophia pressed her hands to her still flat stomach, and despite everything, despite the fear and the impossibility of it all, she felt a fierce surge of love for the tiny life growing inside her. I'll protect you, she whispered to her unborn child. I don't know how, but I'll find a way. But even as she made the promise, she felt the weight of her circumstances crushing down on her. She was alone in this, completely and utterly alone. The next morning, Sophia looked at herself in the mirror and practiced her normal expression. She couldn't let anyone at the hospital know, especially not Alexander. Not yet. Maybe not ever. At the hospital, she forced herself to eat crackers before rounds to settle her stomach. And when the inevitable nausea hit during a particularly difficult surgery, she excused herself quietly and returned as if nothing had happened. Alexander, however, was becoming increasingly attuned to her every move. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked after she had excused herself for the third time that week. "Just a stomach bug," Sophia lied, unable to meet his eyes. "It's going around," but Alexander was a doctor and a good one. He noticed the way she avoided certain smells in the cafeteria and the careful way she moved as if protecting something precious. 2 weeks after discovering her pregnancy, Sophia's secret almost came out in the worst possible way. She was assisting Alexander in a routine surgery when a wave of nausea hit her so suddenly and violently that she swayed on her feet. Alexander caught her elbow, steadying her with strong hands. "Sophia," he said, using her first name without thinking. "When was the last time you ate?" "I had breakfast," she lied, but her voice was weak. Alexander studied her face with the intensity he usually reserved for difficult diagnoses. "You've lost weight," he observed, "and you're pale." "I'm fine," Sophia insisted, but even as she said it, another wave of nausea made her press her hand to her mouth. "Go home," Alexander commanded. "That's not a request, Miss Chen. Go home and rest." As Sophia gathered her things, she felt Alexander's eyes following her every move. She was running out of time before he figured out the truth, but she still had no idea how to tell him, or if she even should. That night, lying in her narrow bed in the apartment she shared with the family she now knew didn't truly love her, Sophia pressed both hands to her stomach and whispered to her baby. "Your daddy is a good man," she said softly. "He's brilliant and kind, even if he doesn't want to admit it. He saved me once, and he's saving people every day. I just don't know if he'll want us." The uncertainty was eating her alive, but for now, all she could do was protect her secret and hope that somehow everything would work out. The truth about her family came to Sophia in the cruelest way possible, through an overheard conversation that shattered everything she thought she knew about her life. It was a Tuesday evening in late October. Sophia had left the hospital early, finally giving in to Alexander's increasingly concerned suggestions that she take better care of herself. She told him she was fighting a persistent stomach virus, and his worried eyes had followed her as she left. If only he knew the real reason for her morning sickness. The apartment was supposed to be empty. Margaret had mentioned something about visiting Derek at his friend's house, and Henry was supposedly at a doctor's appointment for his worsening blindness. Sophia had been looking forward to a rare moment of solitude, time to think about the growing life inside her and figure out how to navigate the impossible situation she found herself in. She was reaching for her key when she heard voices from inside. "The marriage to old Holbrook will solve everything." Margaret's voice carried through the thin door, sharp with calculation. Sophia froze, her hand halfway to the lock. "Marriage? What marriage? But isn't she too young for him?" Derek's voice sounding uncertain. "That's the whole point, dummy," Margaret snapped. "He's old and rich. When she marries him, we get the money for the surgery, and then when he tragically passes away, we take the insurance payout." Sophia's blood turned to ice. They were talking about her. They were planning to marry her off to the 90-year-old man who lived in the nursing home. "I can picture it now," Derek laughed cruelly. "My sister marries some random old man and steals his money." "She's not even your real sister," Margaret's voice was filled with disdain. "We've wasted so much money raising that girl. She's not even my real daughter. Time for a return on our investment." The words hit Sophia like physical blows. Not their real daughter. Not their real daughter. Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped her keys. Everything, every sacrifice, every double shift, every penny she'd earned and handed over for Henry's medical bills, it was all a lie. "What about her job at the hospital?" Derek asked. "What about it?" Margaret snorted. "Let her keep working. More money for us until the old man dies and leaves her everything." "And Dad's surgery?" he said mockingly. "What surgery?" Henry's voice joined the conversation, and Sophia's world completely collapsed. Henry's voice was strong, clear, without the tremor of pain she'd grown accustomed to. "There will never be anything wrong with my eyes, never better." Sophia pressed her back against the hallway wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, her hand pressed to her mouth to keep from making a sound. The conversation continued, but she barely heard it over the roaring in her ears. "Not their real daughter." The words echoed in Sophia's mind as memories began to shift and reshape themselves with this new, horrible context. The way they had always treated her differently than Derek. The way Margaret's affection always felt conditional, tied to how much money Sophia could provide. The way Henry's medical episodes always seemed to coincide with times when Sophia had been considering spending money on herself, like when she'd wanted to buy textbooks instead of the cheapest used copies. How long had they been lying to her? The cruelest part was how thoroughly she had believed it all. Every tear she'd shed over Henry's supposed blindness, every extra shift she'd worked, telling herself it was for family. Every dream she'd deferred, every sacrifice she'd made, all for people who saw her as nothing more than a source of income. Sophia sat in that hallway for nearly an hour, listening to her fake family plan her life like she was a commodity to be traded. They discussed Mr. Holbrook's assets, how quickly they expected him to die, and what they would do with the money afterward. Not once did they mention her happiness. Not once did they consider what she might want. She was pregnant with the child of a man who might never forgive her, working herself to exhaustion at a hospital where she was falling, in love with someone who thought she was beneath him, and the people she called family were planning to sell her to the highest bidder. The rage came first, hot and pure and cleansing. How dare they steal years of her life, her love, her devotion, and give nothing real in return? But the rage was quickly followed by something worse, a deep, aching grief for the family she had thought she had. For the father she had believed loved her despite his illness, for the mother she had tried so hard to please. Even for Derek, who she had worked to put through college despite his constant mockery. None of it had been real. None of the love she thought she'd felt from them had ever existed. When Sophia finally stood up, her legs shaky from sitting in the cold hallway, she felt like a different person. The naive girl who had been willing to sell her blood for her family's needs was gone, replaced by someone harder, clearer, and infinitely more determined. She opened the apartment door and walked inside, her face composed despite the storm raging in her heart. Margaret, Henry, and Derek were sitting around the kitchen table, papers spread between them, what looked like insurance, documents and marriage contracts. "Oh, you're home early," Margaret said, quickly shuffling the papers together. Her voice had the false sweetness Sophia now recognized as manipulation. "How are you feeling, dear? You looked so pale this morning." "I'm pregnant," Sophia said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret's face went through several expressions: surprise, calculation, anger, and finally cold fury. "You're what?" Henry's voice was sharp, without any of the weakness he usually affected. "Pregnant," Sophia repeated, watching their faces carefully. "With the child of Dr. Alexander Sterling." Derek's mouth fell open. "The Sterling heir? Holy shit, Sophia, do you know how much money he has?" Sophia finished coldly. "Is that all you can think about? Money?" "Don't take that tone with us," Margaret snapped, all pretense of motherly concern evaporating. "After everything we've done for you." "Done for me?" Sophia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean like lying about Dad's blindness? Or planning to marry me off to a 90-year-old man for his money? Or maybe you mean raising a daughter who isn't even yours for the government checks? The color drained from all three faces." "You were listening," Henry said, and his voice was perfectly clear, perfectly strong, the voice of a healthy man who had been pretending to be sick for years. "I was," Sophia confirmed, "and now I know exactly what kind of people you really are." "Now listen here, you ungrateful—" Margaret started, but Sophia cut her off. "Ungrateful?" Sophia's voice rose for the first time in years. "I've worked myself to the bone for this family. I've given you every penny I've earned. I've sacrificed my health, my education, my happiness, all for people who were lying to me." "We raised you," Derek shouted. "We put a roof over your head." "You used me," Sophia shot back. "You took in a little girl and turned her into your personal ATM. And when that wasn't enough, you decided to sell me like a cattle to the highest bidder." Margaret stood up, her face twisted with rage. "You don't know what you're talking about. Your father is sick." "My father?" Sophia laughed bitterly. "Which father? The man sitting right there who can see perfectly fine? Or my real father, who I'm guessing you never told me anything about?" Henry shifted uncomfortably. "Sophia, you need to calm down." "Don't." Sophia's voice was deadly quiet. "Don't you dare tell me to calm down. How long, Henry? How long have you been pretending to be blind?" When he didn't answer, she turned to Margaret. "How long have you been stealing from me?" We gave you a home when no one else wanted you, Margaret snarled. Your real parents died in a car crash and you were headed for foster care. We saved you. You saved yourselves, Sophia corrected. You saw a vulnerable child and an opportunity for profit. Well, congratulations. Your investment is about to pay off, isn't it? She walked to her tiny bedroom and began throwing clothes into a bag. Her hands were shaking, but her resolve was firm. Behind her, she could hear them arguing in harsh whispers. You're making a mistake, Henry said, his voice cold now. All pretense dropped. Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? You're pregnant and alone. I'd rather be alone and pregnant than surrounded by people who see me as nothing but a paycheck, Sophia replied. Should we stop her? Derek asked. Let her go, Margaret said coldly. She'll come crawling back when reality hits. Sterling's heir is way out of her league and she won't be accepted. When she realized this, she'll do exactly what we tell her to do. But Sophia knew she would never come back. She would rather sleep on the street than spend another night under the same roof as these people. As she packed, one thought kept running through her mind. Alexander. She can't tell him the truth about the pregnancy. She had no idea how he would react, especially when he saw her as a gold digger after that night. As Sophia stood in the apartment hallway after the devastating confrontation with her fake family, her small suitcase in hand, she realized she had nowhere to go. She had no money saved. Every penny had gone to Henry's fake medical bills. She had no real friends outside of work colleagues who barely knew her personal situation. She was pregnant, alone, and homeless. The only place she could think of that would be open all night was the upscale nightclub where she worked. At least there, she could sit in a corner until morning and figure out what to do next. The club's neon lights seemed garish and cold as she approached the back entrance. John, the security guard who knew her as a reliable worker, looked surprised to see her with a suitcase. Sophia, you're not scheduled tonight, everything okay? I need somewhere to sit for a while, she said quietly. Is that all right? Marcus, a kind man in his 50s who had always looked out for the female staff, nodded sympathetically. Course, honey, you look like you've been through hell. Come on in. Sophia spent the night curled up in a booth in the corner of the club, her suitcase beside her like a pillow. The music pounded until 3 a.m., then finally gave way to the quiet sounds of cleanup. Staff members occasionally checked on her, offering water or a snack, but Sophia could barely keep anything down. Her pregnancy symptoms, combined with the emotional trauma of discovering her family's deception, left her feeling weak and nauseous. She dozed fitfully, jerking awake every time someone walked by, her hand instinctively protecting her stomach. By dawn, she looked pale and exhausted, dark circles under her eyes making her appear almost ethereal in the early morning, light filtering through the club's windows. When Sophia didn't show up for her morning shift at the hospital, Alexander's concern turned to alarm. She had never missed a day of work, even when she was clearly unwell. Has anyone heard from Miss Chen? He asked Dr. Martinez during rounds. No, sir. It's not like her to be absent without calling. Alexander tried her phone repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail. By noon, his professional concern had transformed into something deeper, fear for her safety. Alexander decided to check on her at home, telling himself it was what any responsible supervisor would do for a missing intern. When he knocked on the apartment door, Margaret answered with a cold expression. What do you want? She asked, not bothering with pleasantries. I'm looking for Sophia. She didn't come to work today. Margaret shrugged with complete indifference. She moved out, said she didn't want to be part of this family anymore. Alexander studied Margaret's face, noting the lack of concern, the casual dismissal of what should have been alarming news about a young woman's disappearance. Moved out? Where did she go? How should I know? Derek appeared behind his mother, equally unconcerned. She was being dramatic about some nonsense. Probably went to find some rich guy to take care of her and her. He stopped abruptly. Her what? Alexander's voice was sharp. Nothing, Margaret said quickly, but Alexander caught the calculating look that passed between her and Derek. Henry appeared in the background. The foolish girl has no money and still insisted on leaving, he smirked, holding a newspaper unconcerned, and this made Alexander's blood boil. How come her family seemed not to care about her disappearance? Alexander had seen enough and left. He had to find her, no matter what. I want every private investigator in the city looking for Sophia Chen, Alexander told his assistant as soon as he returned to the hospital. Check hotels, shelters, anywhere a young woman with no money might go. But Alexander couldn't sit still while others searched. He drove through the city himself, checking every diner, every hospital, every place he could think of where Sophia might seek refuge. By her second day at the club, Sophia was clearly unwell. She had managed to clean herself up in the staff bathroom and change clothes, but the lack of sleep and constant nausea were taking their toll. Viktor Petrov, the club owner, found her sitting in the same booth where she'd spent the night. "You can't just live here," he said, his Russian accent thick with irritation. "I know," Sophia said quietly. "I'm looking for somewhere else to go. I just need a few more hours." Viktor studied her with calculating eyes. He had always found Sophia attractive, but she had consistently rebuffed his advances. Now, seeing her vulnerable and desperate, he saw an opportunity. "You want to stay here? Fine, but nothing in this world is free, little dove." Sophia looked up at him warily. "What do you mean? You want a room? You pay for it. But since you have no money?" Victor's smile was predatory. "There are other ways to settle debts." "I'm not that kind of person," Sophia said firmly, trying to stand, but a wave of dizziness made her sit back down. "You don't look like you have many choices," Victor said, moving closer. "Besides, you're already here, alone, with nowhere else to go. Who's going to miss you?" "I can't," Sophia said, backing away as Victor advanced. "Please, I'll find somewhere else to go." "I don't think so." Victor grabbed her wrist. "You've been eating my food, using my facilities. Time to pay up." "Please," Sophia begged, her voice breaking. "I can't, I'm pregnant." The words tumbled out of her in desperation, hoping they might make Victor back off. Instead, his eyes lit up with a different kind of interest. "Pregnant, even better. That explains why you've been looking so peaked." His grip tightened on her wrist. "Don't worry, I'll be gentle." "Let go of her." Alexander's voice cut through the dim club like a blade. He stood in the entrance, his face a mask of controlled fury, flanked by 2 security personnel he had brought with him. Victor immediately released Sophia's wrist and stepped back, his demeanor shifting from predatory to defensive. "Dr. Sterling," he said with false friendliness, "what brings you to my establishment during the day?" "I came for her," Alexander said, his eyes never leaving Sophia, who looked pale and shaken in the booth. "And I heard enough to know you were threatening her." "Threatening? We were just negotiating." "You were attempting to coerce a pregnant woman into sexual favors in exchange for shelter," Alexander said coldly. "That's sexual harassment at minimum, possibly attempted rape." The security team moved forward, and Victor realized he was outmatched. "This is my club, and this will be your arrest if you don't step away from her immediately." Alexander approached Sophia carefully. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. Sophia shook her head, then looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "You heard what I said." "About being pregnant?" Alexander sat down across from her in the booth. "Yes, I heard." "It's yours," Sophia whispered. "From that night, 2 months ago." "I know you'll think I'm lying, that I'm trying to trap you like you said, but—" "I don't think that," Alexander interrupted softly. "I know you, Sophia. I've been watching you since you came back to me, and I know you're not capable of that kind of deception." "You don't understand," Sophia said, the words pouring out now. "My family, they're not my real family. They've been lying to me for years. Henry isn't sick, there are no medical bills, and they were planning to marry me off to an old man for his money. I have nowhere to go, no money, nothing." Alexander reached across the table and took her hands. "You have me. You called me a gold digger," Sophia said, her voice breaking. "You wrote me that check, which you tore up," Alexander said. "I know, Sophia. I had to investigate your situation when I couldn't find you. I know about the fake medical bills, about you not being their biological daughter, about everything they've done to you." "Why?" Sophia asked, confusion clear in her voice. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about you," Alexander admitted. "Because every day I worked with you, I saw more of who you really are. Because I was falling in love with you, and I needed to understand you, and I can't bear not having you around me." Sophia couldn't resist kissing him at this point, and he also took her lips intensely, clutching onto her as if afraid to let go any longer. "You remember me, don't you?" Alexander said softly, after finally letting go of her lips but still holding her tightly. "From when we were children," Sophia's breath caught. "The warehouse. You were the boy tied up in the warehouse." "You saved my life then," Alexander said, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "A 7-year-old girl with your exact face gave me water and ran to get help. I've been looking for you ever since. I was so scared, Sophia whispered with a smile. But you looked so hurt, so alone. Just like you've been all these years, working yourself to exhaustion for people who never deserved your love, Alexander said. But you're not alone anymore. I love you, Alexander said, reaching out to cup her face gently. I've loved you since that night, and I think I've been in love with the little girl that saved my life since I was 13 years old. What do we do now? Sophia asked, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. Alexander's eyes followed the gesture, and his expression filled with wonder. We raise our child together, he said. We build the family you've always deserved, one based on love, not lies. Are you sure? Sophia asked. I have nothing to offer you, no money, no family, no... Alexander silenced her with now a gentle kiss. You have everything, he said against her lips. You have the biggest heart I've ever known. You have strength that humbles me, and you have my love, completely and forever. The next morning, Alexander made several phone calls. By noon, investigators were at Margaret, Henry, and Derek's apartment with a warrant. The fraud charges were extensive: years of stolen government benefits, forged medical documents, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable young woman. How did you know? Margaret demanded when the police arrived. Dr. Sterling hired investigators, the lead detective explained. Turns out Miss Chen's parents died 15 years ago, and you've been collecting disability benefits for a man who has perfect vision. As they were led away in handcuffs, Derek shouted back at the apartment, This is all your fault, Sophia. You ungrateful. But Sophia wasn't there to hear it. She was at Alexander's penthouse, her hand in his as they watched their baby's first ultrasound on his laptop, scheduled with the best prenatal specialist in the city. 6 months later, Sophia walked down the aisle of Sterling Cathedral in a dress that had belonged to Alexander's grandmother. Her medical degree hung proudly on their wall at home. Alexander had insisted she continue her studies, and she had graduated summa cum laude despite her pregnancy. You look beautiful, Alexander whispered as she reached him at the altar. We look beautiful, Sophia corrected, her hand on her rounded belly where their daughter kicked actively, as if excited about the celebration. Alexander's parents, who had welcomed Sophia with open arms from the moment they met her, beamed from the front row. She's perfect for you, his mother had told him. She makes you better and happier. If you enjoyed this story, kindly like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more. See you next time.